let's get into this story about the State Department official, Anel. So earlier, before, I think it's been maybe a month or so now, we actually had Craig Mockheiber on the show. He was a UN official that resigned from the UN because of the Biden administration's actions with the war in Gaza, and also the way that the UN was choosing to handle that. So he's been very vocal, and he's been on a number of shows to talk about that. And now we have Anel Shaline, who actually announced that she has resigned from the State Department, and she chose to do so publicly. Not only did she choose to do it publicly, but she chose to discuss it on mainstream media. So I'm actually surprised that they had her on MSNBC and they allowed her to say as much as she did. But we got to get into this tonight, and I'm going to explain to you how this plays into some of the events that actually happened over the weekend in reference to Gaza. She was on Read Out. Shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. Let's go ahead and dive right in.
As President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remain locked in a public rift over Gaza, deep divides exist within Biden's own government. We've seen government officials resign in protest over U.S. support for Israel's war, and congressional staff placing flowers outside the U.S. Capitol to draw attention to civilian casualties. Now, there is another resignation from the State Department. For the past year, Anel Shaline worked for the office promoting human rights in the Middle East. She wrote for CNN that she believed strongly in the mission of that office, but, quote, such work has become almost impossible. Unable to serve an administration that enables such atrocities, I have decided to resign from my position at the Department of State. Whatever credibility the United States had as an advocate for human rights has almost entirely vanished since the war began. And joining.
So first and foremost, let's give a big round of applause for Anel for being brave enough to speak out. This is not easy to do. And most people would choose to remain silent. So let's give her a round of applause. We got to admit here, this could be a career killer for her because she spoke out publicly about this. So this is a huge risk that she is taking here. Let's get in.
Now is Anel Shaline, former human rights staffer for the U.S. State Department. Ms. Shaline, thank you so much for being here. Well, let me ask you this question. You made a decision to not just resign quietly, but to do so publicly. Tell me why.
So initially, I was not planning to do so publicly. As you mentioned, I was only briefly at the State Department just for a year, and I planned to resign quietly. But when I started to tell colleagues that I was planning to resign because of Gaza, they said, please speak for us. Many, many people are not in a position where they feel they could resign. They've spent their whole careers in government, whereas I was sort of transitioning, I'm coming into it with sort of a different position. And so I decided I would go public because so many people are so shocked and horrified by what's going on. And are trying to do what they can on the inside to change the policy. And so resigning and going public about it seemed to be one of the only options left.
Pause here for just a second. So what that tells you there, ladies and gentlemen, is that there are other State Department employees that feel the same way that she does, but they're not willing to, they're afraid, right? Again, this could be a career killer. So they actually, encouraged her to come forward about this publicly. So I think that speaks volumes. And it makes me wonder if we're going to hear from more state employees from the State Department come forward as well.
Having been at State, what about your experience there? What have you seen from the inside that you objected to so strongly that you felt you couldn't work there anymore?
In particular, it was that we are not upholding U.S. laws, that there are laws against providing weapons to governments that commit gross violations of human rights and that block U.S. humanitarian aid, that these laws are not being upheld. And I think this is not only having obviously a devastating effect on the people of Gaza, but this is also devastating for America, for this administration, which came in claiming to want to reestablish America's moral leadership in the world, claiming to uphold the rule of law, the liberal international order. I think for myself and for other colleagues who believe in the mission of the State Department and believe in the values that America claims to uphold, these decisions were became untenable to stay in with this administration.
Notice again, she stresses with this administration. So it's really interesting. She's not holding back here and holding the Biden administration accountable, which I wish more people would do. Notice that she also said the US government is not upholding the law. So this is someone saying this on national television. Joy Reid has one of the most popular shows on MSNBC, I think, behind Rachel Maddow. So a lot of people saw this, and I think it's great that this message got out there, and it's really disturbing the fact that we're all just sitting here and that our government is not even upholding the law. Now, they want you to uphold the law. They want to tell you that you need to follow the rules. They want to tell you when it comes to protesting, you need to follow all the rules and you need to do it the right way, or the way that they tell you to do it. They want you to follow what the police tell you to do. They want you to stop resisting. They want you to give in. But when it comes to the government, they don't have to adhere to those laws. So we see more hypocrisy, ladies and gentlemen, right? We see people who have basically established that they are above the law. And that's dangerous for all of us in this country.
Did the changes in the Biden administration's position, including abstaining and allowing a UN resolution to go through, which did call for a ceasefire, and, having the ship docked off of Gaza, providing food, airdropping food, did those changes and shifts in the Biden administration's position impact your decision at all? And what do you make of them?
Well, I welcome these minor shifts. The overarching policy has not changed. The U.S. continues to fast track massive amounts of weapons to Israel, and they're not using American leverage to insist that aid get in through ground routes. A plane can carry 2 to 3 tons of aid, and a single truck can carry 20 tons. And there are hundreds of trucks waiting at the border to get food and medicine to these people. The pier that the administration is building is largely a PR stunt. They are now dealing with a lot more public pressure on this.
A PR stunt, and she's calling it out for what it is. That was a weird question for Joy to ask her, that if this pier that they're trying to build or whatever, again, I do think it's a PR stunt, if that actually influenced or would change her decision or whatever. Obviously it didn't, because she still resigned. So I don't even understand why Joy, I don't understand why Joy was asking that question, because obviously that did not have an impact, and it didn't make her want to continue to keep her position at the State Department.
But they could simply use their leverage and insist that Israel has to allow in adequate aid. In terms of the UN Security Council resolution, it is encouraging, but then the Biden administration came out immediately and said it was non-binding.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I hope that this is perhaps the beginning of more of a shift, but thus far, nothing has made a difference for the people of Gaza. They're still being bombed continually and starving.
My last question.
That's right. If obviously people are still starving, this pier has not been built, and the pier idea was, again, I agree with her, a PR stunt anyway. And then also they could have just done this the easier way, which is have that aid come in through the ground, which obviously the Biden administration has not been holding Netanyahu or the IDF accountable for preventing that aid from getting in the first place. It's absolutely ludicrous that anyone would think that this idea of building this pier or calling for, the ceasefire and then actively admitting that it's not binding, it's ludicrous that they would even believe that that is influencing people's decisions. And you're going to see how the American people feel about this conflict towards the end of this story.
A lot of controversy over the term genocide. Do you believe what's happening in Gaza is genocide?
I know that the term genocide is technical. It's highly specific to meet the definition, and so I'd rely on experts. But based on my understanding, I would say yes, that the Israeli government is trying to erase this population from this land in Gaza, but also the treatment of Palestinians in the West Bank. Unfortunately, this current Israeli government, this far right-wing government of Netanyahu, is engaged in actions that are really beyond the pale, that violate international humanitarian law, that violate the law of war. And furthermore, that there are Israelis whose hostages are inside Gaza, and the Israeli government is not prioritizing them. They're prioritizing continuing to drop the bombs.
I wish we had more time, but we are out of time. Anel, Shalene, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, no, we have no more time. You got to go because, like she said, the Biden administration is still continuing to give the weapons to Israel and thus allowing Israel to continue the assault that is happening on Gaza. And that's what I want to continue calling it. And it goes a little bit further than that. There was an attack over the weekend at Al-Shifa Hospital. Over 400 people apparently have been injured there. I want you to hear what the State Department had to say about that. It's very telling here. They're trying to do everything that they can to run cover for the state of Israel. Now, this was actually tweeted by Andre Damon. Let me go ahead and play this video here from the State Department and also the press secretary. Listen to what they say here.
Do not believe that this attack was on the hospital. The attack was on the Hamas fighters.
Let me turn it up just a little bit because these people, I can't you play.
Do
turn
not
up.
believe that this attack was on the hospital. The attack was on the Hamas fighters that are hiding. Do not believe that this attack was on the hospital. The attack was on the hospital. The attack was on the Hamas fighters that are hiding inside a hospital.
Pause. Out of all these attacks, have you heard of Israel capturing anyone from Hamas? Have they weeded out Hamas? No, they haven't. So you see, Anel had the courage to do what this guy does not. He doesn't have the courage to call it out for what it is. He wants to continue to keep his job, keep his career. But this is just blatant. It's blatant lies. You cannot continue to run cover for Israel.
Inside a hospital, some place that they should never be.
We also have to call out Hamas here. They are operating out of hospitals. That's what they're doing. They're embedding themselves in civilian population.
We don't know that we had no proof of that. They still have no proof of that. And if they're there, how come none of them were harmed? How come none of them have been captured? None of them have been injured. You know who has been captured, who has been injured? Their own hostages. You know, the 3 Israeli hostages that were killed by the IDF, not by Hamas. It's just, and if they really cared about the hostages, like I said before, think about something, folks. Them preventing to allow the humanitarian aid to get in, that affects the Israeli hostages too. What you think they just happen to have a food hidden somewhere, especially for them? No, that affects all of them, all of the people that are in Gaza. So if they really cared about those hostages like they said that they did, they wouldn't starve them out either. And then you got Miss Pierre here, the press secretary, again, running covers. You know, how is this any different from the lies that Sarah Huckabee Sanders told every press conference for Donald Trump? How is this any different? The press secretary's job is to protect the president's image at all costs. And that means lying to protect the president's image. So how is this any different? It isn't. The only difference is one is serving under the Democratic Party, one served under the Republican Party. But she's told just as many lies as Sarah Huckabee Sanders has. I just want people to see that both parties are doing this.
Hamas here, they are operating out of hospitals. That's what they're doing. They're embedding themselves in civilian population. This is what they're doing.
So that just gives Israel the right to just slaughter everybody. And I would say this to anyone who has a brain. Don't you think it's strange that we're not seeing 30,000 anymore? I've been saying for the longest time, I believe that number's at 50,000. All of those people that have been killed in Gaza, and Hamas is still there because they're not actively trying to weed out Hamas at all. I don't know how people like Corinne Pierre, I don't know how her and the other gentleman from the State Department, I don't know how they sleep at night. I really don't. And it gets worse because humanitarian workers have actually been killed. This happened over the weekend Zami and Chef Ali's last video shows them cooking meals for Gaza's hungry at WC Kitchen. That's the organization they're part of. They were killed today by Israeli warplanes in Gaza in disregard of international law, echoing the daily killings of Palestinian civilians in Gaza over the past 177 days. These guys here were there to cook food.
Hey, this is Zami and Chef Ali. We're at the Diva'sDoodles kitchen, and we've got the mise en place. Tell us a little bit about it, Chef Ali.
This is the mise en place to cook the rice. So we have all the spices for boil the water to be ready for the boiling water inside the rice. This is the stir fry with oil, we stir fry onions. We have the spices, and after we stir fry the rice, we add the water. The water is aromatized with these spices, this mix of spices. There is the black lemon, there is chili, 7 mix of spices, bay leaf, salt, pepper, and tomato paste.
Indeed. So this is the beautiful, fragrant, aromatic rice that will be served today from Diva'sDoodles kitchen. Thank you. Hey, this is Zami and Chef Ali. We're at the.
They are now gone. These people who were just there to provide humanitarian aid, to cook food for the people because Israel was blocking food from getting into Gaza. So they were there to help the people. These people are now, they were killed. And WC Kitchen here, they actually acknowledged that. So World Central Kitchen, we are aware of reports that members of the World Central Kitchen team have been killed in an IDF attack while working to support our humanitarian food delivery efforts in Gaza. This is a tragedy. Humanitarian aid workers and civilians should never be a target ever. And that is against international law. And Israel has been committing all types of war crimes. Now, Netanyahu has already issued some weak apology on Twitter. Oh, we're sorry. We were unaware. Were they? Were they unaware? Because I want to remind you, in November, Politico released this. The U.S. has sent Israel data on aid group locations to try to prevent strikes. This article was written in November. The Biden administration has been providing Israel with the location of humanitarian groups in Gaza for weeks to prevent strikes against their facilities. But Israel has continued to hit such sites. So the Biden administration is lying. The press secretary is lying. The State Department is lying. And they think you just can't go back on Google and pull these articles back up. They think people forgot. I didn't forget. I read a lot of articles and I may not remember every single date, but I remember this one. So they knew exactly where the humanitarian organizations were located. This was intentional. They don't want the Palestinians to eat. They want them to starve. This is why they blocked the food from entering. And this is why they attacked the humanitarian workers. Now, when we talk about public support, I want to show you what is happening right now in reference to how Americans feel about this war. And you'll see a change. Shout out to Case Study QB for this. In November of 2023, 45% of Americans disapproved of Israel's action in Gaza. As of March 2024, that is now 55%. That is increased by 10%. The Biden administration is ignoring the will of the people. They're ignoring what the constituents are telling them. They're ignoring the protests. They're ignoring all of this noise because they decided a long time ago to get in bed with the Israeli lobby. They decided a long time ago to allow an organization like AIPAC to infiltrate, and yes, I mean infiltrate the government and to buy politicians. They allowed these things to happen. And when you have this this bond with these lobbyists, they want something in return. I'm seeing politicians in DC defending Israel harder than they defend us. Those of us that are Americans, they're out there fighting and standing for Israel more than they fight for us. Now that should bother you. All of you should be livid about that. They never go through this extent for us. They can rush and pass a bill immediately to give weapons to Israel, but they wouldn't even rush to increase the minimum wage for you in this country. And then when they finally voted on it, they voted against it. And that included Democrats, by the way. They wouldn't rush to do that. They don't even want to give everybody health care in this country, but they got money to give to Israel. So what Americans need to start asking, they need to contact their representatives in DC, and they need to start asking them, who are you working for? Are you working for your constituents, or are you working for Israel? Because that's exactly what's happening here, folks. And even in Israel, it has gotten to the point now where even in Jerusalem, people are protesting and calling for a ceasefire. Netanyahu's own people. Shout out to Case Study QB for this. Thousands of Israelis protest in Jerusalem for new elections and a ceasefire. The world is turning against Israel. Let's get into this here. Oh, I think I fast forwarded. There we go.
Let a UN ceasefire resolution move forward. Netanyahu is now facing major protests at home. Tens of thousands taking to the streets in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. These are the pictures over the weekend. These protesters are calling for early elections and a ceasefire deal. Meantime, the U.S. delivered a new weapons package to Israel over the weekend, including more than 1,000 2,000-pound bombs. Let's get the very latest from Tel Aviv and NBC's Raf Sanchez. Raf,
pause here for a second. So notice how what they do, it was Easter weekend. So they knew a lot of people in this country probably weren't paying attention because they were celebrating Easter with their family. This is when they try to sneak legislation through, when they think that you're preoccupied, when we're not paying attention. Now, when I interviewed Rocano on this show, he had the audacity to tell me that people shouldn't protest in DC on the weekend because the representatives are not there. They're usually back home in their districts on the weekend, and then they come back to DC at the beginning of the week. You were in DC over the weekend to make sure you get these weapons to Israel, though. But when we asked you to show up to participate and protest for Medicare for all, for everyone to have health care in this country, all of a sudden it's, we're not there on the weekend. You shouldn't be doing these protests on the weekend, but you can be there on the weekend to send weapons.
let's start on today's meeting. What can we expect to learn? And if the U.S. is delivering new weapons, does that undermine their efforts to restrain Netanyahu's offensive?
So, Anna, just starting on the meeting, as you said, it's going to be senior officials on both sides. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. We're expecting National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan from the American side, a member of the Israeli War Cabinet, Minister Ron Dermer on the Israeli side, as well as Sullivan's counterpart, the Israeli National Security Advisor. And the topic of discussion is this very public disagreement between Israel and the U.S. on the way forward in Rafah, that city in southern Gaza where more than 1 million Palestinian civilians are sheltering. The Americans hoping to convince their Israeli counterparts that there is an alternative to an all-out ground invasion, something Netanyahu has signaled so far he is not open to.
So one thing that I was going to say is that notice he said they're calling for a ceasefire, but they're still sending weapons, right? Right. So essentially, they're not actually calling for a ceasefire. It's just, I mean, think about it this way. If I tell you to stop, drinking and driving, and I'm still giving you the keys to the car right after you've been drinking, am I really telling you to stop drinking and driving? No, I'm not. They are still providing Israel the tools that they need to remove the Palestinian people indefinitely. So they're not actually calling for a ceasefire. Remember what the State Department said. The State Department said it's not binding. All of a sudden, the U.S. government is above international law. And every other country out there in the world should be criticizing the US government at this point in time. Because if it was any other government that was doing this, if it was Russia that was doing this, if it was China that was ignoring international law, the US government and its Western allies would be livid. But all of a sudden, when the US does it, it's okay. All these countries that are quiet, why are you so quiet? Why are you so silent, UK? Why are you so silent, Germany? Why are you so silent, Italy, Greece, the Netherlands? Why are you so silent when the United States ignores international law? But if it's Russia or China, all of a sudden, all hell has broken loose, and we need to do everything that we can to hold them accountable. The hypocrisy knows no bounds.
Talking about these big protests over the weekend. We saw the pictures with the just crowded streets. This is the biggest protest since October 7th. How is the prime minister viewed there domestically?
Well, Anna, he is struggling. The polls show that if there were an election today, he would lose that election. Israel's longest serving prime minister, those same polls showing a majority of Israelis would like there to be an election today. But just because people are out on the streets in big numbers, just because a majority of them would like a chance to vote right now, doesn't mean there are going to be new elections. Prime Minister Netanyahu does have a majority in the Israeli parliament, including members of the far right, including some centrist opposition parties who joined him after the start of the war. But there is trouble brewing for him potentially, especially over this question of whether or not ultra-Orthodox Jewish members of Israel's society should serve in the military, something that they haven't done previously, but that there are growing calls for them to do now as this war stretches on. I will say, Anna, Netanyahu throwing a little bit of political red meat to his base later on tonight when the Israeli parliament is expected to vote through a bill giving him the power to ban Al Jazeera and other foreign television stations.
You guys hear this? So he wants to try to ban Al Jazeera. If you're not doing anything wrong, Netanyahu, why would you have a problem with Al Jazeera reporting the news? It's because you don't want them to continue to show people the atrocities that Israel is committing. That's why. They want to control the information. They want to control the press. And the US government is behind that as well. Don't get it twisted, because our government wants censorship just as bad. Just as bad. So this is where we are, folks. And we have to pay attention during these weeks where there's holidays. So what's the next holiday coming up? Everybody pay attention, because this is when they try to sneak aid through when Americans are distracted. So while everybody's out chasing, dyed eggs and looking for Easter eggs and sitting on the lap of a giant ass bunny, they're sending weapons to Israel, passing legislation, and Israel is going in and slaughtering more people. Just like during the Super Bowl. Let's go to some of the comments. Deneen says, Joy has committed to that blonde wig. You'll have to take it out of her cold dead hands. I don't know, Joy. Come on now. Come on, Joy. Thank you, Marvin. U.S. leadership role in world ends in chaos. D1 says, Sabs, greetings from the UK, England, North London. Amazing broadcast channel. Had to sub the other day. Thank you and welcome. Welcome to the newbies. Collage says, if nothing ever revealed the corruption of the government, this absolutely does. Yes, indeed.